Welcome to the Connection Podcast. I am Lauren Dry, also known as the Connection Catalyst. Connection and this podcast for me is personal. As a driven professional, I found myself an expert in all things work and business, but it was at home that I really needed clarity and ease. After finally finding it one marriage breakdown and one marriage reset later, and finally discovering what really works to have connection in modern relationships, using science, simplicity, and soul, our signature program, Rise into Regulation, was born. That's giving so many others in modern, driven relationships back clarity and ease for good. On the podcast today, we're going to dive deep together on all things relationships, business, identity, and leadership. And clarity and ease is at the heart of it all. And we are so happy to be with you so that you can have what you need in connection, mind, body, and soul too. If you're watching this on YouTube, I wore my shiniest top today. I think as a bit of a distraction. This is an episode I've been sitting on, digesting about, and really just trying to find the right space for, the right time for a long time. And I think that's because this is a conversation that is to be had organically. And it's in respect of how many right opinions there are, how many right perspectives there are, and out of respect for the fact that everyone is on their journey. And it's not my place. It's not your friend's place. It's not your partner's place. It's not any of your mentors' places. It's not even your pastor's place to tell you what the right answers are on this right now while you're listening to this episode. And that is this wonderful, safe, connective, and respectful place where we can talk about anything woo-woo. We can talk about anything religious. We can, most importantly, talk about science with a lot of safety, with a lot of care and a lot of tenderness that everyone's season right now is the right season for them. I say that as someone who is a self-confessed skeptic, okay? Anytime someone tells me they're a skeptic, I get really excited. I love complex conversations. I love talking about the real deep stuff. And also, I am someone who grew up with a lot of contempt for anything woo-woo, anything religious, anything even related to quantum physics, which excites me a lot at the moment lately. So to paint a picture for you, one of the first times that I met with one of my very first early years boyfriends was when we went to, or at least told our parents that we were going to a youth night at a church. And we kept this up for a little bit. And to my parents, I'm so sorry. We kept this up for a little bit because it allowed us to, do a couple of things. First, for me, it was to get to know the person that I was dating more. It also really played into this idea that people who believe in anything outside of themselves, anything spiritual or religious, that they are in a cult, and that even if we go once, we can maybe make fun of them. There was an idea, and there still is, particularly in Australian culture, a lot of distrust, a lot of contempt, and probably well-placed cynicism about the institution of religion, maybe even people who claim to be religious, followers of God, who are woo-woo, who are incredibly spiritual, who maybe proclaim certain ideas and ideologies and ways to live that maybe don't match their real morals and the way that they live. So it's a touchy subject. Even if you are someone who grew up and you were raised in a home where it was safe to talk about all things woo-woo, or you were raised in a very religious family, or perhaps you have your own experiences with religious trauma, there's a lot around this subject. And even considering whether there's something more to us, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of rightly placed anger, distrust, and there are a lot of people who place their whole sense of identity, sense of self within religion or spirituality in itself as well. So when it comes to this being a safe place, I want to come at this subject from the viewpoint of the person that I used to be. And that is someone who would look at anyone who had a sense of spirituality, however you relate that, as maybe a little bit silly. Let's use the word silly. And I have been on every end of the spectrum, someone who doesn't believe in anything else, a very proud atheist, despite being baptized as a Catholic, going to a Catholic school. I have been on the spiritual track, tarot cards, crystals, ceremonies under the moon. And I have absolutely also been someone who, with a lot of skepticism and cynicism, has chosen to investigate everything from Buddhism theology to philosophical studies on Stoicism to yoga, gentle parenting, reparenting, psychology. And because I am a lover of history and a lover of making up my own mind, I am someone who hit a point in time where I thought, I wonder what's going to happen when I open up this collection of texts that are on average 2,000 years old, and for some texts much, much, much older. And it has been a complex and really confronting journey. And I'd love to touch a little bit today on why I have found that journey important, why it has made me a better person. It has made me a kinder person. It has also allowed me in some ways to be more skeptical and less. And it has allowed me to have a lot of compassion and understanding, not only for people that I disagree with, but for myself when I don't understand something. And for as a historical text, understanding why so many big world things can feel so intense for so many people. I do bring my science nerd self to this conversation as well. And we're going to cover some really fun stuff about what happens outside of ourselves and why that's an important conversation to have, and the evidence and the data behind it. Because when it comes to having any kind of relationship or understanding or trust in something outside of yourself, I think it's really, really important to remember some very cool studies, observations, and data around what happens outside of just our physical bodies and how that can be used, whether it's in your imagination or whether it's real, to really allow your nervous system to feel like it's not alone. If you know anything about co-regulation, and if you do feel like you're on a journey that's all on your own and you don't feel understood, and it can feel really challenging and isolating, the absolute worst, by looking outside of yourself to see what kind of support there is on some kind of level, whether it's scientific or spiritual, what we actually are able to do is anchor into how our nervous systems rewire and reset. And that's through a version of co-regulation and knowing that we're not alone and being able to seek something outside of ourselves. So the pressure and the weight of our own growth or our own connection or our own desires doesn't rest entirely on whether we're good enough. There is a really cool phenomenon that can happen in times of extreme stress and extreme physical life danger. And I'd love you to look into this. It's something called the third man syndrome. Now, there have been times where a hiker has been lost in the snow, or someone on a boat has been lost out at sea, and they're at the end of their absolute last reserves. And there's been a phenomenon that's been studied and that's come out of some of these encounters where the survivors have explained and described a third man or person outside of themselves. It's not just themselves and their own thoughts, but either a physical or a mental or an auditory voice that has come to them in moments of extreme danger that doesn't have an explanation. And it has guided them through the storm, off the cliff, into safety again. And at the very least, given them comfort and compassion and hope when all other hope seemed gone. And these were people who were not religious, who didn't have any other explanation, who could physically describe this third man, let's call it. With instances like this, there are so many occasions where until they have come out the other side of it and sought help and support to understand what happened, they had no idea that these things were possible, repeatable, and unexplainable. If you are a skeptic, if you are someone who really restricts their understanding of reality to the 3 dimensions that we know. But I just want you to take this podcast and this opportunity to just spread a little curiosity around what might be available to you as an extra layer of support. And this is not in any way to convert you or to convince you one way or another, but to hold space for the fact that we are human beings. We actually don't have all the answers, and that's okay. I think when we're really, really stressed and it seems like maybe our lives are falling apart behind the scenes, or even more obviously, and we're really, really stressed with work or parenting, health, all sorts of really big life challenges, we feel like the solutions must rest solely on our shoulders. And in my experience, there has been a beautiful awakening and journey towards peace and comfort that has come with allowing myself to feel cared for, that there is a beautiful, loving purpose, that there is a beautiful design and careful cultivation of my journey and my growth, even when it hasn't seemed possible. And if there's nothing that you leave this episode with except for hope and trust and compassion for yourself, and maybe even some curiosity about the possibility that there is something outside of you that really deeply cares, then, you know, what an absolute joy to leave this episode with. The thing is probably discovering these senses of comfort that really allow you to anchor into yourself in the best way don't usually come with ease and comfort. They usually come from a place where you've had to go through something really, really tough. And my sense of peace and ease sometimes has come from a place where I have looked outside and around about what other people have been through and said, well, you know, I don't really think my story in the scheme of things can compare to what others have been through. But all the same, my own internal journey has been important and valuable and precious to me, and has provided me with answers, lots of questions, but a lot of answers around what it means to be cared for. So my level of discomfort probably began right when I started having kids. I had a picture of what kind of parent I wanted to be, and I had mainly achieved everything else that I've achieved in my life through sheer determination. And when it comes to being a parent, that's just not possible. I don't know what journey or what stage of parenting you're at, but determination is not what allows your children to feel safe, secure, and regulated, and allows them to grow up into the people that you wish they could be. It's a humbling experience. It can also be incredibly lonely, particularly if you are surrounded by a community that either doesn't have children or parents in a way that's different to you. And that's the situation that I found myself in when I first became a parent. And it was frightening. It was lonely, mainly because of the criticism that I gave myself. And so I did what most people in my position do. I just tried harder. And after we had moved house, I'd had some big career changes, some big friendship group changes as well, and found myself not only emotionally, but physically feeling very isolated. I started reaching out more to have other types of support so that I could feel a sense of connection and a sense of security that I just wasn't finding in the places that I used to reach for. And I did this kind of secretly under the radar. It was a bit embarrassing, to be honest. I didn't want to be that woo-woo girl. But I threw myself into it the way I tend to do with a lot of things. I had some friends who were really into tarot cards, went down that route, didn't like the idea of psychics. I'd been to one when I was earlier who claimed that she had been talking to a friend of mine who'd passed, and there was something that didn't sit right with me there. So I chose not to go down that route, but there was a lot of meditation. There was a lot of manifestation, crystals, moon ceremonies. And I will be honest, there was a lot of comfort that I gained out of that time. Although I did start to fall down a little bit of a slippery slope of, okay, well, I have to have this crystal and then I have to have that crystal and I have to say these words the right way. And what if I don't? And what if there's bad spirits and all sorts? It started opening up a bit of a cavern to, well, gosh, what actually is there out in the world and how exposed am I? But it served me for a period and there was a certain comfort that I gained from that. But then as life got harder and in many ways as life got easier as well, I found that my internal environment wasn't really matching my external environment. I still felt levels of anxiety. I found that my levels of anxiety and stress didn't actually match what was happening externally to me, or sometimes they did, but I really wanted to have a little bit more mastery around that. And so that really accelerated not only some of my spiritual work, but I actually had already decades of experience and understanding and personal experience with all sorts of levels of psychology, human behavior analysis, nervous system work. So I felt like I was throwing everything at this, but that ease really wasn't coming into my body. So on my journey, what I chose to do is kind of lift off the blinkers and the ideas and pictures that I had in my mind about what I thought I knew about anything from Buddhism to Stoicism to any kind of religion, and just thought, let that be my next journey. Let me get curious about all sorts of schools of theology and find my own way in the world as to what spirituality is and how it can relate to being a human. And it was a fascinating journey. There's a really cool book I recommend. It's called The Hidden Life of Trees. I know it doesn't relate to religion and it certainly doesn't relate to spirituality much at all. But if you're a quantum physics person and you are curious about observations between ourselves and the world around us, I highly recommend it. It's a really beautiful holiday read and I come back to it again and again and again, and I think it'll change your life. But also another thing that I started reading out of sheer spite was the Bible. And I started with the King James Version and I started reading from the front to the back with all the these and the thys. And when I tell you right now, it was a journey in, let's say it was a journey in openness, curiosity, rage, confusion, boredom, and bravery to start having some really difficult conversations. I was lucky enough to be in a community where I was not only surrounded by a lot of skeptics, but a lot of people who were deeply religious, people who considered themselves spiritual, the whole kit and caboodle. So I started having some really difficult conversations with everyone from people who experienced religious trauma to people who were deeply religious to people who were very much outside of religion to people who considered themselves just Christians. And I had a lot of challenging questions, and there are still things that I don't have answers to. I tell you right now, that first time I read the story of Moses and how many times that Pharaoh's heart was changed back again, the words I would have with someone who wrote that. So not to mention the ideologies and the questions around gender, relationships, all those things. For me, I'm at a stage in my journey where that is your place to figure out. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a spiritual guru. I am not even a quantum physics professor. I am at a stage where I am learning everyone's perspectives and sitting in the middle space listening, but I understand the confusion and the frustration. And then I reached the New Testament. And I want to preface this by saying I am still on a journey, and I think everyone should be. But if you are someone who is a fan of philosophy, if you are someone who is curious about where the laws of Western society even came from, my goodness, is the New Testament, the Sermon on the Mount, all sorts of wonderful teachings from this guy who arguably lived 2,000 years ago. Man, are they cool. If you want to look into a documentary about whether Jesus lived or not, A Case for Christ is a really cool one. There's a movie, but there's also a documentary about a guy who was a journalist for a very big newspaper, and he wanted to find out if Jesus was actually a real guy or not. Highly recommend going down that rabbit hole. It's a fun one. But I started to realize that irrelevant of how I identified myself, man, there's some really cool teachings. There's a lot of peace there. There's a lot of wisdom around what prayer can be. For some people, prayer is a form of meditation. For other people, prayer and meditation can be interchangeable. But I really started to love prayer as a practice and a complement to all the work I was doing because of what I referenced earlier about that third man syndrome. The very first time that I chose to, instead of meditate, pray, I felt this measurable, inexplainable, just wonderful sense of peace that washed over my shoulders. I felt supported. I felt heard. I felt seen. And hey, if you can do that to your quantum physics process, and if you can do that to the universe, great. I felt whatever that choice was within me in terms of what my prayer looked like, I felt a new experience that became very precious to me. I felt like there was someone I could talk to, someone who deeply cared about me. And for anyone who is a skeptic and on the fence, I still encourage you to read the New Testament, just particularly anything Jesus speaks about. Most of it is not controversial at all, is incredibly supportive, and as a text that helps you to understand yourself better and live from a place of ease and care and confidence and self-security. Read it. Just for the historical value, just for the funsies around philosophy. Read it. You will not regret it. And if you want to go on a journey where you pick apart what your religious friends think, if you want to go on a journey where you pick apart what your spiritual friends think, if you want to go into a church and have a fight with one of the pastors, I am the type of person that will tell you to do it, because ultimately we do have one life. We actually don't know. There has not been a single study or piece of evidence that links into what happens before we are born and when we die. We don't know what our soul consists of. And I think that there's a lot of freedom in that. There's a lot of empowerment that we can take from it. We don't have to have all the answers, but we can go on a journey through which our own lives in a three-dimensional state can so beautifully be enriched by understanding not only who we are, but a sense of care and comfort that comes with knowing that whatever it is out there that we're never going to find out until we reach the end of our life, we are deeply cared for and loved, even through the hardest of times and through the most impossible of situations. And I do preface that with saying I understand that there are people in the middle of the most impossible and heartbreaking situations, and I would never for a second sit in front of you and say, this was all meant to happen for a reason. I would hold your hand and I would listen to you, and I would say that I'm here and I will hold space for you and I will pray with you. And I know that no matter what you've been through, that you are loved and you're here for a purpose. That's what I would tell you. But ultimately in the world, there is so much division. There are so many people very set in their ways, who think that they know the answer. Who am I to tell you that you're wrong? I'm not going to do that. What I am going to tell you is that life is a lot more fun and we have a lot more ease and confidence in our body when we can sit back, figure out what is our own truth, show curiosity for others, and most importantly, compassion for the versions of ourselves that we've outgrown or we've evolved from, or that we may even go back to. Who am I to say? But I do deeply trust that there is a path, there is a purpose, and there is wisdom in our journey, and that I truly, truly believe that there is something so much bigger than ourselves, and that the few years that we get together on this planet would never, ever encompass how much more there is to our souls and to who we really are. If anything, all I'm learning about myself as I get older and go deeper into what my version of faith looks like is a lot more care and tenderness for the people who I disagree with. They were right and they are right for their belief systems and their framework of what they believe the world is supposed to look like. And when I can show compassion for that version of reality, I invite them to evolve and maybe expand their own perceptions as well, or not. That might not be their season, but I have to trust that they have a path that's meant for them. And I think this episode, the person that I'm speaking to the most is actually the previous versions of myself that really thought that they had the answer and that they needed to fix or change anyone else in order to save them. And maybe even the shame or regret or embarrassment that previous versions of myself felt when they moved on to something new and realized that perhaps that their last version of themselves wasn't quite right. This episode is for those versions of myself too, and just to give them a gentle hug and say, that was right for you then, just as this version of me is right for me now. And what a beautiful evolution to realize that I get to grow and that I don't have to have the exact right answer, and that I can hold space for people whose opinions are different to mine, and that I do get to feel like I'm deeply cared for, and that I don't have to have all the answers about, whether the universe, whether God's word has been interpreted exactly the way I think it's supposed to be, whether quantum physics itself as we know it is the truth. Science itself evolves every day. But I feel so much peace. I feel so much care and tenderness from my third man on the journey. And I feel that with me when I feel joy, when I feel pain, and I am grateful to that experience. And so I'd love for you to take away that invitation from today's episode to allow yourself to be held, to allow yourself to be seen, to get curious, to feel free to be a skeptic and feel free to find your own path. I am grateful that you're here. I am grateful for you. I am grateful that I've been through all of this and I'm still on a journey. And I'm grateful that my heart is open to connect with you and to share more with you and to learn and be open to my own self too. Thank you for sharing this space with me. If it's brought up anything difficult or really challenging, I respect that. If there's anything that I have said on this probably stumbling episode that may not have come out perfectly as well, I trust that it's perfectly imperfect for right now. I may do more episodes in the future. I am on a journey and I'm so okay with the imperfectness of my words. And I'm really proud of myself for doing this episode. It's probably been the episode that scared me the most. Maybe if I do round 2, there may be a little bit more pizzazz in it. But I'm grateful that you're here. If you've listened to this episode, you must be on a journey too. And I'm so excited for you. And I'm so excited to connect with you. Please come and hang out with me on Instagram at Lauren_dry to chat more. I'd love to hear your thoughts and I would love to hear your experiences. I'd love to know what stage of the journey you are on. whether you like your stage of the journey, whether you feel you're evolving. And I hold so much tenderness for whatever stage you are at. And I'm going to reflect and say to you, as much as I could say to myself at every stage, it's the right stage right now. And continue to be a joyous skeptic. Love ya.